talk about specifications, like, most people think that specification, it looks like a BOQ, but that is not really so. A specification means simply that it is something specific. So it's a detailed description of whatever you're trying to do. So if you're talking about waterproofing, then there has to be a specific description on, say, how you take care of the surface. There has to be a specific description of what kind of materials you're going to use, how to apply it, and so on. And these are the things that, allow us to kind of execute the job to a particular expectation. Like, once you have a right specification, you know that the client is getting something right. And at the same time, you know that the operator or the applicator is also doing the works right. So there is a very clear documentation on what the client can expect, on what the applicator is going to do, what kind of material the material manufacturer is going to supply, and the end result that the customer is going to get. So specifications, again, there are a lot of different types: performance specifications, material, functional, or technical specifications. And most of them would look something like this. So pretty much we make it very, very clear, like what part of surface preparation you need, what kind of site equipment you need to do this, surface tensile strengths, what is there, then what kind of material you're supposed to use, how much you're supposed to use it, what are the properties of the materials. So once all these different details are put together, that pretty much constitutes a very particular specification for a job. A lot of people codes, like there might be guidance codes, like they guide you how to do a particular process. Like, for example, there are there are codes on execution of basement waterproofing, say BS 8102 or 16471 in the IS codes. So they talk about different kind of steps that you need to take up to do basement waterproofing, for example. Then sometimes code also talk about other things such as ethical practices, what are the right way to do things, health and safety, technical procedures, as well as legal compliances that particular process must follow. So code of practice is typically voluntary, like, it tells you a lot about the industry standard and best practices. So it is nothing that is written in stone that, something has to be done a particular way. Like, for example, codes of practice, like this is one of the bodies which we work with, the Construction Industry Development Council. So we have started development of a lot of these codes of practice. For example, these two talk about injection grouting. So injection grouting with joints, like injection grouting for cracks and joints, and then injection techniques or codes of practice for curtain grouting. So each one is actually a very, very detailed document, like about 50 to 60 pages each, which goes through the process step by step and tells you what you need to do. Then the next part that most people kind of confuse all these things out with is standards. So standard is, again, it's an established set of guidelines, criteria, or norms that are widely accepted. So basically, it's a very standardized way of doing something, like, in short, like, rather than get very confused about it. And these standards can be of different types. Like, there are technical standards, there are safety standards, there are quality standards, regulatory standards, environmental standards, for example. So like, even when we talk about IS codes, okay, Indian standard codes. So it is very, very important that you learn to look at the titles of these particular things. Like, say, for example, in this particular case, it talks only about waterproofing and dam proofing of wet areas in building recommendations. So one thing is that it is very clear that this particular document on your left, I think IS 14, that is 16471 or something. So that gives you recommendations on how to treat wet areas in buildings. Whereas if you look at the other standard on your right, the Australian standard, so that talks very specifically about waterproofing of wet areas in residential buildings. So it is not a guideline, it is not a standard. That is a document which tells you this is what needs to be done and this is how you do it. So always, anytime somebody says that, okay, something meets this particular standard or this particular code, my recommendation is, in the first step, go and just go to Google, check out what that code says. And that is how you'll come to know what exactly that code does or what exactly it means to say. So standard making bodies, there are many. BIS is one, American Concrete Institute, ASTM, ASHTO, ISO. There are multiple bodies that do it. And mostly these codes or standards fall under a lot of different types. So some codes might only talk about terminology. Then there are some codes which are testing standards, for example. I'll show you some examples. Then there are product specification and codes of practice. So even if you see the Bureau of Indian Standards, like BIS, actually has at the moment got about 36 codes relating to waterproofing, or 36 documents relating to waterproofing. So again, some of them are terminologies. There are some that talks about like product specification right here. There are some which are codes of practice, and many of them there you'll see are test methods. So test methods will tell you how to test a particular method in a particular way. But if you see the number of product specification, like many people ask whether this waterproofing meets a specification. So that means it has to meet this particular document here, product specification, things like that. So nobody can say that, okay, the something should meet the requirements of IS 13826, for example. But that is just a test method. So it cannot meet a particular specification. So once we understand what is a standard, a specification, a code of practice, the next thing is a BOQ. Okay, this is what we typically look at in terms of waterproofing. So it is basically a document which kind of involves like how you're going to do the work. So it is a short description of the work where you list the materials, the labor, and the other costs involved in the work. So this allows you to estimate, how much the thing is going to be priced out, and how it's going to look. So for example, a typical BOQ looks something like this. So say even in the BOQ, there has to be different parts, like what kind of surface preparation you will do, how you will go about treating cracks and joints, what will be your coating, whether there are any other steps to be taken, then your coating, and then your protection. So all these different work items together will form your BOQ. So the BOQ style, like, in India, that is one place which has got no consistency or no standard, but pretty much it has to involve a few key points, things like material supply or supply and apply, how much material is to be used. Like most standards, I'll show you a few examples. They don't really talk about it. Performance properties of the materials, rate inclusions, unit of, for example, a specification like this, which only talks about, in general, that you apply something with a 1:4 cement mortar. So it's very ambiguous. It's not telling you how much to apply, what weight you have to use. It gives you some odd one value somewhere there about, and put a 5-coat heat reflective coating. But what should be the consumption? What are the properties of the material? It doesn't talk about. Same thing goes here. Like, okay, here they are at least a little bit better. They are specifying what kind of how much of each material you're supposed to apply. But things like how much water you're supposed to use, or what are the properties of the materials, that is missing. So these are all what we call wrong product specifications or incomplete ones. In this case, of course, again, it's so complex. Like in many cases, it's a wrong material, absolutely, that is being selected, and very, very what you call very ambiguous again. Like many people just say that, I'll show you this one also. It says just use IS 26, a material conforming to IS 2645. No one says what that material is, what is the property of that material, or how much to use, because IS 2645 is very, very specific in the kind of materials to be used. Now here, for example, the specification on the head says that it's a specification for polyurethane, but here it's saying apply an elastomeric acrylic emulsion. So these kind of discrepancies that come up in the specification, they make it very, very confusing. Like even if you see here, the kind of difficult mix ratios and things like that. So it is very, very what you call ambiguous. Then say there are specifications like this. So it says retaining wall, use a hybrid polyurea. These are the properties of the material. Fine, that is fine. But then they're given, it should meet the standard as per tender is so and so. So now if you take a look at ASTM D412, so it's actually a test method. If you take ASTM 7234, it's again a test method. The only one giving performance specification is ASTM C836. So basically, okay, a material can be tested, but what should that test value be? That it is not clarifying. So all these kind of things, they are made to sort of confuse people at times. So as engineers, you really have to pick and choose, like, what you're looking at. This is one of my favorites. Like it says, like in the first layer, a slurry of cement at say 0.488 kg per square meter mixed with 0.253 kg per square meter of the polymer, and then you apply it with a cloth. It's really very confusing. These kind of things you can barely follow at site. So it is like when you're talking about specifications or wrong specifications, like this is something that you have to protect yourself against also. Like even if you are an applicator, if you get this kind of a specification, this is a danger zone, because it is telling you to use a wrong system, like just use cement and polymer to apply it on a roof, which is going to crack immediately. So if you are the one who's taking responsibility for executing this kind of a job, you're 100% going to land up in big problems. So that is why reading the specification, understanding it, and discussing it, and telling the right things to your client becomes very important overall. Uh, Along the same lines of specifications, it comes to warranties and guarantees. Like even if you see this kind of a guarantee that comes up, this guy says, okay, the product is guaranteed for 100 years as long as the concrete does not crack. So which is very silly. These kind of guarantees don't really help anyone in the market. So anytime you come across these things, you come across a particular specification or a guarantee, just read it. See, end of the thing, don't forget that waterproofing is a complete system. It is not one product. It is not one single magic solution. It's a combination of a good surface to start off with, and then doing the work, take care of the joints, do the coating, make sure all the cracks are filled. And based on that, and you do the coating and the protection and the drainage. Once you take care of all these things back to back, that is. So in final comments, when we are talking about specifications, understand what is written and what you are specifying. When it comes to specifications and BOQs, be precise, specific, and detailed in your documentation, even as applicators. So you have to make sure what kind of substrate you should receive from the customer. And then you make sure what kind of work are you going to do. Once that kind of clarity is there in your documentation, then both you are protected and the customer is protected at the same time. Have clarity on the required properties, and just think about it, like, are you over specifying? Like I've seen sometimes you're talking about bath. So again, specifications, they are on one hand quite simple, but on the other hand, they can be quite complex to unravel. So I thought, do this and have a reliable partner. Like this is what we also do with most of our customers, is that we share a lot of these documentation so that the job is done correctly and expectations are managed across the board. So do that also with your end, like whether you are at the customer end or whether you are at the applicator end or a material supplier. I think this has got something for all of you put together. So that I'll say thank you very much.